It's in the house.
Good morning. Welcome to another Women's Legislative Roundtable, affectionately called WLRTs. We're so happy to have you with us today. In the House, we have members from the Richmond and Southampton Roads Leagues today. Thanks for representing, and many more online. And we're going to go ahead and kick things off and turn things over to Denise Harrington, our advocacy chair.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everybody. And of course, with me being here, Williamsburg is in the house too. And all of our local leagues are here with us. Just wave your hand or something, or wave at somebody. Thank you. So we're going to get started right away. As you know, our theme this week is supporting funding for public education. And so what that really means is to stop the diversion of funds from public education transferring into private education, and also to protect the regional greenhouse gas house initiative. I'm going to say it wrong, but Reggie affectionately is the greenhouse gas initiative. That's right. So, but Reggie, to stop that, we'll have some people that come and will talk to us about the environmental impact of that a little later on. So first, many of you know we are partners with the Fund Our Schools Coalition, which is the largest coalition of organizations, professionals, teachers organizations, and other community organizations designed to protect the funding of public education. And we have one of those members here today. We have two of those members here today, excuse me. The first member that I'm going to present to you, affectionately, these folks have been following very diligently about the history standards, as many of all of you all are as well. And so without any further delay, I would like to introduce Zowee Aquino, Policy and Communication Team Leader from the Hamkae Center. So Zowee.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Hi. So let's see here. Okay, I believe I will be giving updates about the upcoming SOLs, or the standards of learning, as some of you might be familiar with, but for some of you who may not be, the context would be that every 7 years or so, our standards of learning in Virginia public schools are updated and revised to keep current with our changing world. And this year was set to be, or I guess last year, 2022, was set to be the revisions for our history and social standards, standards of learning, which started out in the Northam administration and ended with a really comprehensive revised document that had not only really comprehensive history and history being taught from different perspectives than had been in the past. I myself actually used the 2008 and some of the 2015 SOLs for reference, but it also included so much feedback from over 200 organizations here in Virginia, or not just organizations, stakeholders here in Virginia, community leaders, subject matter experts, and curriculum experts, as well as over 5,000 public comments from Virginians throughout this process. And two key things that the Department of Education staff at the time highlighted was that stakeholders really wanted to see in these revised standards, number one, understanding the drivers of history and understanding, not just what happened, but why things happened and how what happened impacts everything going forward. So that's number one. And number two, seeing mostly overlooked and underserved, marginalized voices that are not typically seen in past standards. And the August document, or the revised version that the Department of Education was able to present to the board in August, incorporated all of this feedback. So how does this relate to today? Unfortunately, through the last couple months, with the changing of our administration, the new superintendent and the new board members of education have really have really halted this process. So what was essentially supposed to be the presentation of the revisions, review from the board, and then moving on to public hearing sessions. There were revisions, there were additional revisions made by the superintendent along the way, which did not really excluded the public. Transparency throughout this process was very minimal, if not at all. And unfortunately, the revision that the superintendent presented in November was drastically different from August. And it really left public stakeholders very wondering what happened, how did we get to this draft? And the draft in question was actually included feedback and consultation from really I guess politically leaned education groups, education advocates who, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to get everyone up to speed concisely as possible. But essentially these groups that the superintendent had worked with but not disclosed to the public were politically leaned conservatively, and just the resulting draft was very exclusionary to those marginalized communities, as well as excluded content that historically had been taught in Virginia. I'm sure some of you might have seen the calling indigenous communities immigrants, that sort of thing, as well as just in addition to removing historically marginalized communities, they somehow also added I think over 130 standards in this document. So as well as just developmentally not challenging for students, ultimately a very inappropriate draft. So with with over 10 organizations, Hamkae Center, including I believe the League of Women Voters, Hamkae Center in November challenged this draft with all these communities in Virginia, stakeholders, again, educators, parents, families, communities, to say, this is not the history that that Virginia should have. This is not the history that our state constitution guarantees us. And ultimately, right, this is not the education that our students deserve. We had such a fabulous draft that had taken so much time, feedback, and energy from the community, from the public, from our state. And in contrast, this draft presented in November just had none of that. There were no voices incorporated other than the ones that the superintendent and the administration believed to be more valuable. With such voices like Hillsdale College, the authors of the 1776 curriculum, I believe they also had Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education as one of the named consultants. The Heritage Foundation, a very conservative leaned think tank. But ultimately, because of, again, an amazing turnout, public comment, and just really strong testimony and public support, the SOLs themselves were able to did not proceed. They did not go forward, but the board did instruct the superintendent to find a compromise between January and August. And although at Hamkae Center, we believe that was an impossible task because these standards were just so different. Somehow the superintendent was able to put something together to present in this upcoming board meeting tomorrow, actually. And I can put a link to our website with kind of part of this recap, but also just another comprehensive look at where we are at this moment. But essentially, looking at this January draft of combined standards, our organization, as well as the partner stakeholders we've been working with, we don't believe that this draft is a viable draft, ultimately because the same problems persist that were in the November draft, right? Number one, of course, the content, and I've been skimming the surface about the content. It's I'm honestly shocked that someone could make this in 2022, but the content is still pretty, still has a lot of really remarkable omissions and mistakes. And like I said, not just omissions, but content mistakes and chronology mistakes. And it's not developmentally appropriate still. In addition, the politically skewed foundations that existed in the November draft are still present here. I believe the superintendent said in a video that she released to the press that the November standards that she had received so much criticism from both from the public, but also the, I believe the Virginia Commission of Civic Engagement wrote a letter against these standards. She used those as the foundation for this document. And they not only, just do not comprehensively support students or develop their learning, but it also creates parameters for teachers that would, really get in the way of being able to teach and support students. And then the last thing, which is honestly one of the biggest, most glaring things, is that even in this process, the superintendent just continue to act without accountability and transparency. She claims that she again consulted with 200 organizations to work on this this revised standards document that she's presenting. But again, who are those organizations? Hamkae Center certainly knows that we were not one of those organizations, but within this, what's supposed to be a public democratic process, it shouldn't be pulling teeth and nail to understand, who's working on this, whose perspective of is this, what was the process, and why were other organizations or community members not able to give feedback in what is supposed to be an open democratic process, which again, in contrast to the August document, clearly outlined its process, told us who the stakeholders were and what they were going to do next. So at this point, what we believe is that number one, the January document. Yes, please put questions in the chat. I will be reading these. Yes, so the January document is not viable, and we should not proceed with these for public review or public hearing. Instead, however, I will highlight that 3 organizations in Virginia, the Virginia Social Studies Leadership Consortium, the Virginia Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, and the American Historical Association, actually were able to get together and create a combined standards document that is faithful to both the August draft and the compromise that the board outlined for the superintendent. So what does this look like? Basically, these 3 organizations created another version of the standards of learning that the superintendent was assigned to create, and they call it the collaborative standards. What these collaborative standards entail is, again, it's just similar to August, a very comprehensive, not only learning of history, but kind of an implementation plan and how history is to be learned. There's a crosswalk document to it. So you can clearly see the edits from the 2015 to 2022, as well as where the documents were merged. And again, like progressive skill. And lastly, the document itself outlines the process, the stakeholders, as well as the changes between the 2 documents, which makes it not only a strong document for learning, but just a product that's faithful to the original document and to the desires of the public. So instead of the January SOLs, we are requesting that the Board of Education actually proceed with review and public hearing of the collaborative standards that are made by the VSSLC, VASCD, and AHA. So I'm going to answer some of these questions that I see, like 1 or 2 in the chat. I will also say,
Zowee, I'm just going to say this. First of all, thank you so much for a wonderful update. And we will go. We have some folks who have just come in, and we want to thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. And we are going to go through the chat, and then we'll send you the questions. And I just like to say this partnership has been great with the Fund Our Schools Coalition, and the Hamkae Center is not playing. They have kept us up to date. They have not missed a beat. Even an announcement that I received from them about February 2nd, if you're concerned and you want to write a comment about these standards, the February 2nd, the Virginia Department of Education will have a meeting. And they even have action things that we can do, and we'll be sending something out. So to keep things moving, we are so grateful. And so I see Delegate is here. Delegate Sewell from the 51st District is here. And then she'll be followed by another one of our partners, of course, with the Fund Our Schools Coalition. Delegate Sewell?
Actually have Delegate Sewell and you also have Delegate.
I know. We're gonna
Okay.
get to both. We're gonna get to both. No, I know. Vivian is one of our, she is one of our members as well. So
Excellent.
we
Okay.
know.
I just always want to make sure I acknowledge her.
Oh, no.
She's
we
such a
know.
pleasure to work with. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having
And you
me.
can stand right there.
Oh,
See
okay.
your face.
Oh,
and everybody
yes.
can
There we
see
go.
you.
Well, hello, everyone who's participating virtually, and hello to everyone in the room. As noted, my name is Delegate Briana Sewell, and I represent the 51st District, which is located in Prince William County, and it spans from Lake Ridge out to Nokesville, so right up to that Fauquier border. But today, I am here to talk to you about the Education Committee. The Education Committee was actually scheduled to speak this morning. I was actually scheduled to meet this morning, excuse me. And upon arrival, we all saw a notice on the door that says meeting canceled, which caught a lot of us off guard. But this year, very much like last year, a lot of what is happening here in Richmond has centered around education and taxes. And I will gladly leave the finances and taxes to Delegate Watts. But I am happy to, will you back up a little bit? Okay, thank you. But I am happy to discuss what is happening on the Education Committee. For the past few weeks of session, a lot of discussion has focused around social matters, quite frankly, when it comes to the policy that we're discussing in that room. But at the end of the day, we know that the real focus should be around funding our schools and making sure that we are increasing our ability to expand the number of teachers who can get in classrooms so that we can decrease this teacher to student ratio while providing them a supportive learning environment. To work towards that, I carried one piece of legislation that allows for teachers with provisional licenses here in the Commonwealth to be able to extend their provisional license. So the way that current policy is written, a teacher with a provisional license, someone who has not received full certification to be in the classroom, but is in the process of working towards it, is able to receive a provisional license on an annual basis for up to 3 years. And at that point, you must go back for a full renewal. Well, there is a caveat that you must be a teacher in the classroom for all 3 years and receive a satisfactory rating. Well, there's this one big grand event that I don't know if you guys remember called a pandemic that we're still trying to manage our way out of. And then also we have to recognize that many of the teachers in our classroom are women. And oftentimes life's events are most likely to impact us. So whether that is the birth of a child, caring for a loved one, or a countless host of other life events that impact our decision to take a step away from the workplace, have impacted over 40,000 teachers here, potential teachers here in the Commonwealth. So at this moment in time, where we witnessed in 2022, through a JLRT study, that there were more teachers leaving the profession than new teachers seeking teaching licenses, we have to come up with every solution possible. And I'm excited to say that that has unanimously passed through the House of Delegates and will be headed over to the State Senate after crossover. Another piece of legislation that we have worked on in a bipartisan fashion is trying to figure out what to do with funding from the 529 program. And I don't know if you're planning to talk about that. Are you okay? So with the 529 program, you have the ability to pay into, basically it is a pot of money where you can provide an investment to support your child's education in one capacity or another, and higher education in particular. For students who have disabilities, that funds can also be allocated towards those different additional resources that you may desire outside the classroom. And therefore it is simply an educational support account in many ways. There were talks about the recent, the bond from the funds that is amounted to a little over, I believe, $2 billion. Am I correct, Logan? But it's over 2 billion, roughly about 2 billion. So don't hold me to that number, but I will get you the correct number. And as a result, we're trying to figure out how we can make college more affordable. So the policy that was introduced this year in the House of Delegates would have allowed for that money to be returned to those families who had invested into the Virginia 529 program. And this is all across the nation. So many states have a 529 program. You can pick the state that you invest in. Virginia's always just been really good with our finances for the most part. So therefore, individuals from outside the Commonwealth frequently invest there. This again would have returned funds. Well, that legislation failed, much to many of our dismay. There are plans to come up with opportunities to provide scholarships in an equitable fashion to individuals who choose to attend Virginia colleges and universities. So there's much to be discussed there. I would encourage everyone to try to follow along with this, and I'm happy to follow up after this meeting with some additional information, because this is one of those items that's just happening very quickly, especially during a short session. So it's very complicated, moving very quickly, and drafting of legislation is still underway as we're continuing to see what's happening there. As far as those social fun problems that we're all, well, I don't want to call it a problem, the social issues that we are frequently hearing about around schools. Today it was a docket basically around transgender students and whether a parent should be notified in advance that a student has chosen to identify as a gender or outside of their biological sex. There have been discussions around should transgender students be allowed to partake in athletics based upon their identity, and so many other conversations. So it's created very heated conversations this week. And that's where a lot of the time and attention has been focused. As you can imagine, we are still focused on student safety in light of the recent events which happened in Newport News, but are also trying to be very thoughtful in the manner that we approach it and aren't trying to use Newport News simply as an agent for change, but more importantly, are trying to have a genuine, authentic conversation around mental health, public safety, reporting systems, and most importantly, what can education systems do to provide a safe learning environment for their students and their teachers. And that is essentially a high-level update on what is happening through the House Education Committee, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you guys have any of it.
Delegate Sewell, we are so grateful for your time and your energy and for you fighting for children, parents, and public education. If there are any questions, we're gonna move things along.
Wonderful.
And then we're going to forward that. But thank you so much. Can we give her a big round of applause?
Thank you for having me.
So in case you didn't hear me, I just said that we're going to take your questions in the chat and then we're going to forward them to her. But right now, one of our own is coming up. Delegate Watts is going to give us a brief summary of some things, and we know that she knows everything there is to know about, no, really, truly, about budgets and money and everything. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to give you a break from all the money today, because I was thinking every time I come up, I talk about the money, but then again, so many of these programs, it's all about whether or not we're going to adequately fund it. So I'm going to take two words from Briana's comments. Obviously, teacher salaries are a huge problem, and we have vacancies in virtually every major system in teachers. And part of it is the salary. I'm going to underscore what I double checked the veracity of, and that is Virginia has the lowest teacher salaries in the nation when you compare them to other salaries of that educational level, the lowest. And you cannot recruit, you cannot have quality, you cannot have retention with that. But then I also wanted to say, as I was looking at bills that we're going to be seeing on the floor, I just want to give you one example. I know I could speak to my daughter's 8th grade math experience as a teacher and what is required of her over and above reaching the students and trying to get them to understand what they need to build on to have a mathematical understanding, and then later perhaps a career, but in any part of life, being able to be comfortable of how you use numbers and their importance. And instead, you've got a lot of testing and a lot of other things. The example I was going to give you that'll be on the floor for discussion tomorrow is that every school's library must put online a catalog of all books in the library and online books, the actual books that are identified as having sexual content, and put online the curriculum outline. That kind of burden is, I'm going to say from my perspective, at least 90% negative burden on the mission of teaching and reaching students, with hardly even 10% benefit from any parent that would look at it online versus actually going to the school. Versus actually having information. So this is the kind of situation that we're in, that it's both funding, but it also is a matter of a trust factor, of a matter of really understanding what the educational mission needs to be. And notice I kept on saying reaching students. But let me also, another assignment that I have, and that I've had for years and years and years, decades, has been on criminal justice subcommittee of courts. I was put on many years ago, in part because there was no woman. And so suddenly I'm realizing that I'm a pro-choice woman, and now I've got to actually understand what I'm talking about. Well, I can't tell you that I understand what I'm talking about totally, but I have read a number of key Supreme Court decisions and have always been quite impressed with the detail in which the Supreme Court decisions go into some of the medical considerations as they are looking at these various issues about particularly second and third trimester abortions and the medical issues that may be involved as you move beyond the 13th week into various conditions that someone who desperately wants a child is going to face and may have to make a medical decision in that second or even sometimes into the third trimester. And again, I have been impressed with past Supreme Court decisions on that. And that this all underscores for me the debate that we had last week, and that will be on the House floor. I believe all of the bills have been killed on the Senate side, but the House will have the debate. They'll go over to the Senate, and that is the balance that will happen. But the debate, let me just outline it on a couple of issues. One, the constitutional amendment. The constitutional amendment that still has within it, and I do want to be exacting, and some of the times when I'm exacting, it's because I'm on criminal law subcommittee, and every word, every description of the act has to be carefully crafted so that you're not picking up somebody who is innocent, who did not have that intent, who did not do this in this relationship to their act, as well as being very precise so that you are able to successfully prosecute somebody for a very defined violation of the law. The language on the constitutional amendment that I wanted to be sure was underscored is that it does contain, unless justified by a compelling state interest and achieved by the least restrictive means. So it sets the benefit of the doubt on the woman's side, the woman's health side, the woman's reproductive health side. Her decision, benefit of the doubt she, with the medical advice, is able to make that decision. But there still is the compelling state interest is still there. If you can define what that compelling state interest is, so that you don't have this specter of just at the last minute, you can do whatever you want. This, of course, did not make it, but I wanted to make sure that for me, that distinction makes a difference when you change it from compelling state interest being controlling and women's health decisions, women's lives, in that particularly the second and third trimester over preserving the fetus, are going to be the benefit of the doubt is on that side of the coin, rather than on the side of the coin that says you have a compelling state interest that you preserve the fetal life at any cost. The other aspect that I would bring in that has some of that same distinction for all my decades on Crim Sub is the whole issue of informed consent. The presentation of this bill, with all of its 2.5 pages, I believe, of things that must be conveyed to the woman before an abortion is performed, the patron repeatedly referred to every operation out there, and that's really not an exaggeration. You have some degree of information that is given to you by the healthcare provider, whether it's a dentist, or that's why I'm saying healthcare provider. I go to the dentist far more than I do the doctor, or a doctor, surgeon, etc. Absolutely. In every field, absolutely. The difference is that none of that is prescribed by law, even prescribed as for informed consent, but prescribed with 2.5 pages of detail of this exactly must be done. And is that just verbiage? No, it's backed up by a civil penalty. You can be taken to court if you don't do it. And those are two aspects of the battle when you do it in the state legislature that are quite different from what individuals may be doing as and facing as they go through their reproductive health decisions throughout their lives. And then I'm going to take one more minute just to get into one other aspect that was mentioned by Briana, Delegate Sewell. And I think there's a couple of folks in this room and perhaps in the audience who will appreciate my mantra of the last X number of years has been, yes, my breadth of background, depth of background is important, and how long I've been at it, but only if I stay up to date. Otherwise, I'm just the old curmudgeon, and I'm also less and less relevant. And I bring that up because one of the fascinating things to me from when I learned about the X chromosome and the Y chromosome is how much we now know is part of the whole gene pattern of any given chromosome. And I know from some of the reading that I have recently done that there was a great deal of concern back in the day when it was determined that the X and Y chromosome had that relationship to whether or not the baby would be male or female, appear to be. Because even then it was known that in a number of other chromosomes, there are aspects of sexuality that are determined by the genes in this chromosome, that chromosomes, how your hormonal system works. So that this idea that there is a specific appearance that defines sexuality, by all of our incredible research into the genomes and how we are determined, just it is no longer the fact. So that the idea that we are going to turn away from this complexity of our being as contained in our total gene pattern, our total chromosome activity, is in part what's at stake as Delegate Sewell was talking about how we approach transgender issues and LGBTQ issues, is to recognize how different each one of us is, who are appearing at this morning in this room, although there may be a few gentlemen on virtual who are appearing to be female. But I know that over my life's interest in things, I'm interested in an awful lot of things that tend to be male, as well as some things that tend to be female. And that complexity is far more than a particular genitalia when you're born. So I just wanted to throw that out. Thank you. Got to make sure I've got all my papers here. I'm always scattering.
Wonderful, wonderful. We always appreciate Delegate Watts and her expertise, and it's very valued and respected here at the League. So our next presenter, the institute where she works really needs no introduction. Plus, she is what I'm affectionately calling my partner in crime in the Fund Our Schools Coalition. And I can't wait to see what she's going to share with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about from the Director of Research and Education Policy from the Commonwealth Institute, Laura Goren. Take it away, Laura.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me on today and for all the important work that you all do to help communities across the state. And also special thanks to Delegate Watts and Delegate Sewell if you're still in the room for your work. I want to briefly touch on some of the priorities of things we're trying to address this year in terms of better serving our students in our schools. And let's see if I can manage to advance my slides. I can. So Virginia, I think, can be broadly characterized as a high capacity state. We're a relatively high income state. We're in the top 10 in terms of median household income, yet we're 40th in the country in terms of state investment in our public schools. And what that means is that while in some local communities, the local government can afford to step up to the plate and make up for the difference and create our communities, in places that have fewer resources, students are left without what they need to really thrive. And we see that in the recently released report from the Education Law Center that said even combining state and local funding, Virginia received a D for education funding adequacy, a D for education funding equity, and an F for effort, which is how much we do compared to what we could do. So I skipped most of my slides about all the problems that creates in our school, but I do want to share this slide, which is that your work and that of other people is making a difference. We have finally, this school year, we expect it to exceed the levels in 2009 of per pupil state funding for public education. And that's after adjusting for inflation. So that's good news. The work that that everybody's been doing is paying off, and we're seeing a reinvestment in our schools this year and next year, and there's more work to do. So with our partners in the Fund Our Schools Coalition, we've identified 5 priorities, and by the way, thank you to the League for being members of Fund Our Schools. The 5 priorities for this year are fully funding the revised standards of quality. This is the staffing levels and other supports for our schools that the State Board of Education says is needed in order to provide a high quality education. And I have listed there the bill numbers and also the budget amendment numbers for the standards of quality. As many of you probably know, the House and Senate appropriations committees are working right now to determine what they're going to fund in their budget proposals that will be released this Sunday. So we are looking forward, hopefully, to seeing some of these things funded in those budgets. And we've provided the budget amendment numbers if you want to contact your legislator. So the second priority area is funding for wraparound services. Some of the legislation that is still in play in this area is a proposal for additional mental health counselors. We don't expect that to get out of the House, but it is formally still alive. And then some legislation that will expand to the descendants of people who were denied an education in Prince Edward County. It would extend to them access to a scholarship fund to try to make up for some of that denial of education that occurred in the past when the schools were shut down during massive resistance. Third area is meaningful investments in student supports. This includes in the area of English language learners who have seen some of the biggest decreases in test scores and graduation rates recently and are falling farther behind their peers in other parts of the country and their peers in Virginia, because Virginia just does less for English learners than most other states. There's also in this area is lifting the arbitrary cap on state funding for support staff. This was put into place during the last recession, and it limits the amount of support for things like custodians and instructional aides and attendance staff who follow up with students who aren't showing up. So that's a really important priority. We do hope to see some progress on this year. Fourth, increased teacher and staff compensation. As Delegate Watts mentioned, we're one of the worst states in the country in terms of what we pay teachers compared to their similarly educated and experienced peers in the private sector. We were the absolute worst in the country in what we pay teachers compared to their private sector peers. Now we are third worst in the country. That's not because we got better. It's because 2 other states got worse, unfortunately. And then fifth, and equally important, is preventing the diversion of funding from public schools. So in this area, some of the proposals that are still around and that we're particularly concerned about are HB 1508, which is a voucher proposal, HB 1821, which would expand the tax credits for donations to private school foundations in such a way that people could actually turn a profit by making the donation, which we think is inappropriate from several perspectives. And then also the major tax cut proposals from the Youngkin administration, which together would cost Virginia about $1 billion this budget cycle and more in the coming years. And that's money that our students really need in order to have the resources they need to thrive. So what does that really mean in terms of our schools? That was a bunch of bill numbers, but it means additional specialized support staff, and that's folks, both mental and physical health staff, additional school counselors, assistant principals, support staff, and we have estimates for every community in Virginia, every school district in Virginia of how many the state would help fund, and we can provide that upon request. So that is my presentation. I will be honest, I've been monitoring the chat, so I don't know. I guess, Denise, do you want to take back over, or do you want me to address questions in the chat?
Would you please?
Sure.
By the way, what a stellar presentation. Very much so. And we appreciate your honesty and telling it like it is. And but at this time, we always love the Commonwealth Institute. And so I see some questions in the chat, and if Laura, if you want to go ahead and address them, that's fine.
Sure. So the first question I see, which is probably the last one that was put in the chat, is about how do legislators sponsoring the educational savings accounts, success accounts, justify taking funds from public education? So these are what I call voucher or neo voucher programs. They're just with a slightly different structure. I think that the arguments they make are that parents can decide better than students where money for their child's education can go. And I think they probably genuinely believe that. I think that unfortunately the research shows that in states that have set up these voucher programs, the participating students end up scoring lower on tests than similar students who remain in their local public school. And that's because the voucher amounts are relatively low, and many high performing private schools don't have the capacity to take a whole bunch of additional students. So students unfortunately end up, many of them, in relatively low performing private schools. I don't know if that answered the question.
Well, that's great. I have a better response for that. And forgive me if I'm from the South, I call it putting lipstick on a pig. Okay. That is the theme for me about vouchers, tuition tax credits, and those of us who are old enough to remember that was the battle cry of segregationists. And Laura also knows there's research out there. And I don't know, Laura, if you are aware that the League of Women Voters conducted a study. I'm pretty sure Carol Noggle is even on here. And every time she hears the word and her whole team, they know that what vouchers really do is unfortunately resegregate schools. There is research out there for that, and that's not going to move us forward. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of a few. And we are so grateful for the Commonwealth Institute's data and everything else and support in this initiative. It is always very helpful. I don't see any more questions in the chat right now for Laura, but I would like to just say thank you. If we can give her a big round of applause. Thank you. And remember, the second part of our presentation today and our subject talks about the environment, something that the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative has been extremely important. There are several states in the United States that are utilizing the funds that this generates, and we have used them. The current emergency management coordinator, when he was speaking at an event, said when FEMA did not grant in Buchanan County when it flooded twice, the designation of being a disaster zone, they needed funds, and Reggie was there. And there's even a resilient fund created. And of course, now localities can apply for grants and things like this. But most of it is coming from Reggie funds. But right now, we had a cancellation with Mr. Nate Benforado because his particular judicial event got bumped up from 10 a.m. to 9 a.m. And right now, one of our wonderful members, Joan Curry, is going to come and to present to us about, she's right here with us, and she's going to come and present to us about Reggie.
Good morning. I'm with the Environmental Committee with Carolyn Kaywood. We have also been working on an environmental justice study. However, of particular interest has been this regional greenhouse gas initiative, which I'm just going to read my talking points. I didn't really prepare anything other than my talking points, so if you don't mind. The background is that in April of 2020, Virginia legislature passed the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act that set out the guidelines for joining and implementing the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Reggie as it is known, is a carbon cap and trade market involving 10 other New England and Mid-Atlantic states. RGGI requires power producers to purchase carbon allowances at quarterly auctions for each ton of carbon they emit. The proceeds of auctions are then returned to participating states. In Virginia, utilities are allowed to recover from ratepayers the necessary costs of buying the allowances at auction. For instance, beginning in January of 2022, Dominion Electric customers began paying for the first year of RGGI participation, with the average residential customer's monthly bill increasing by $2.39. The number of allowances available to producers declines annually. The system is designed to incentivize power generators to switch from forms of energy that produce greenhouse gases that are driving climate change to non-carbon emitting sources. In over a decade of program implementation, power sector emissions in the RGGI states have declined by more than 50% relative to 2005 and provided net benefits to their economies on the order of $4 billion. So the law authorizing Virginia's participation in RGGI requires 45% of all proceeds from the auctions go toward the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, the CFPF. Further provisions require that at least 25% of the flood preparedness funds go to projects in low-income areas. As of September of 2022, RGGI had raised $452 million, with allocations going to the CFPF of $203 million. Flooding from sea level rise and more frequent intense rainstorms from climate change are set to accelerate in the coming decades. Since 1927 alone, the sea level has risen by about 1.5 feet in Sewell's Point at the Naval Station, Norfolk, in the Hampton Roads area. And an additional foot is predicted by 2050. Between 2020 and 2080, the number of residents living in homes exposed to extreme coastal flooding will triple to about 1 million. Roadways flooded will increase from 55 to 340 miles, and 170,000 acres of tidal wetlands will be permanently inundated. In addition, the Hampton Roads area, the Middle Peninsula, the Northern Neck, the Eastern Shore, and cities such as Alexandria will also experience more frequent flooding due to high tide events. Another 50% of RGGI proceeds, $226 million as of September, provide capital for income energy efficiency upgrades to both new and existing housing. The program, administered by Housing Innovation Energy Efficiency, or HEE, and Affordable and Special Needs Housing, ASNH, works in tandem with the federal weatherization program to provide funds for major health and safety repairs. Low-income households face a disproportionately higher energy burden as a percentage of their gross income due to energy inefficient housing. Since its inception, HIEE funding from RGGI has financed nearly $26 million in energy efficient upgrades for new and renovated affordable housing. According to the Piedmont Housing Alliance, lower income families will spend hundreds of dollars less a year on energy costs on average, hundreds of dollars that translates to stable, safe, warm home environments. RGGI dollars are being used in every region of Virginia and are creating high-paying jobs that cannot be outsourced. In September, Governor Youngkin outlined a plan to withdraw Virginia from RGGI. A move critics say is not allowed by law, would drain important state programs of funding, and would hurt the fight against climate change. The plan involves regulatory changes that govern the state's participation in the market. Regulatory process typically takes 18 to 24 months start to finish. Virginia's 3-year contract with RGGI, the body that coordinates the market, ends next year. In addition to many, ends in the end of 2023. In addition to many environmental, faith-based, and regional groups such as Appalachian Voices, 17 Hampton Road cities and counties sent a letter opposing Governor Youngkin's proposal to withdraw from the initiative. Recently, 61 Virginia legislators signed onto a letter in support of remaining in Reggie. The entire Virginia General Assembly will be up for election in 2023.
Right, that's right.
Now is a critical time to call on legislators to maintain our membership in Reggie and the vulnerable communities it protects. All Virginians must be allowed to decide their future and ways to confront the existential threat of climate change.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, my goodness. I'm presented.
Oh, I was looking to see if there are any questions, and I think there is a question in the chat. What did I see? 5, maybe. Okay. Let me just stand right here.
Okay.
And first of all, once again, thank you, our environmental issue group and everything else. But let's see if we can get to some of these questions. Oh. Okay. All right. And this will be placed in the drive. I know some information about this. Okay, it was about the former speaker. So one thing I do want to add, many of you know that I attended a political institute class, and as part of Virginia Commonwealth University, the Doug Wilder School of Government, blah, blah, blah. But the important thing is our particular group happened to do, we took on the concept of, looking at flooding. And we started looking at laws, and we started looking at locations. And I just wanted to add to that, if I can. There are 21 planning districts in the state of Virginia. And the particular Tidewater one, the Southampton Roads Planning District, they have to have a flood plan. And right now, their flood plan, because of what's happening in our coastal region, is, of course, pertains to a lot of keeping Virginia and Reggie. And there's several other groups that she already mentioned about the Middle Peninsula. We talked to someone in Matthews County who is a board of supervisor and a member of that planning commission. And so this is very serious about the state of our state and why we should stay in Reggie. And we really appreciate our environmental group just reminding us that from the advocacy perspective, she said it best, remember, everybody is up for re-election, or we can send them back home, whatever. So to take it away and close us out, our president, Deb Wake.
So I want to, you guys may not know, Joan hadn't really prepared to give her remarks this morning. We had a delegate and two delegates that were caught in committee. And so thank you, Joan, for stepping in. And I don't know what Joan's background is, but the league gives you an opportunity to start at 0 on an issue and really become educated. And that's what we do, is we educate ourselves and then we educate voters. And so put in a plug for joining one of our issue groups. If you want to learn more about a specific issue, that's where to get started. So Joan, thank you again. Thanks to everyone for coming today. We have one more in-person or hybrid one, WLRT next Wednesday, and that will be the day after crossover, or the first day that the bills have crossed over from one chamber to the other. And then because the session was extended, we did add 2 more only virtual WLRTs. And so the last, what is that, 15th and the 22nd of February will just be virtual. So we keep working while the General Assembly is working and beyond. So please join us again next week. And thanks everybody for coming.